As a child, I was always fascinated by nature and in love with wildlife. It was kind of my everything. In my mid-20s, married young with 3 small children, I was lucky enough to find Cannwood, which was a nature-friendly but pretty typical livestock farm in South Somerset. You know, that lattice work of neat green fields and hedges which stretch in all directions, with a pretty house in the middle. And for me, it was just heaven getting here. Initially, I set about farming the land as it had been. A couple of new ponds, we planted some trees at one end of the farm, let the hedges grow a bit fatter. We had 50 sheep and 50 cattle. But it quickly became clear to me that this really isn't very productive farmland. Pretty hard to make a living here. In 2019, we suffered a huge tragedy here. We lost my daughter Iris in an accident. Iris turned a vehicle on top of herself. And it occurred to me that really Iris had spent her life in the wilder fringes of this farm. It's what she loved. Iris was just like me. She absolutely loved all nature. She was outside the whole time with her friends.
We're going right by the sun. I'll get them to fly. And look, they're going up. Look how giant that is. I was right next to them.
After losing her, the decision I took was quite a radical one. It's just I'll make the whole place wild, as she would have loved it. We set about pulling out mile after mile of barbed wire fencing. We opened up gaps in the hedges. We sent the sheep and the cattle away. We filled in the ditches, broke the field drains. And the results were instantaneous. Pockets of dog rose and hawthorn, blackthorn, willow started appearing across the fields. The water started flowing and pooling in unpredictable ways. Little wetlands reappeared. We've documented just an extraordinary resurgence of life here. The mind-boggling abundance of, say, amphibians along the bottom of the valley. When they're emerging from the ponds, you can't walk there because they're just everywhere. Hundreds of % increase in songbirds, yellowhammers, species that weren't recorded here, like tree pipits, which is a red-listed species, lapwing, we've got breeding snipe, just birds everywhere. And I think the 2 most dramatic changes for me have been the abundance of birds in the winter. We always think of the winter as a very quiet time, but here in the winter there are great flocks of goldfinches and mixed thrushes, fieldfares, redwings, and they're feasting on the seeds of all these thistles and docks and nettles and other things that are dotted across the land. Sitting out quietly in the summer months here at Cannwood, listening to life humming and thrumming all around is really magic. I had a friend here recently who said, it doesn't feel like England, it feels like Africa. And I said, no, England doesn't feel like England. This is what it's meant to be like in England. Selwood is just the perfect landscape in which to prioritize nature recovery. This is not productive land by any measure. Nature recovery here in Cannwood is about restoring keystone natural processes to the landscape and seeing what happens. The most important natural process that we've put back here is the extensive grazing and browsing of native cattle. We brought in a small herd of Old English Longhorns from Knepp, and they're free to roam where they want, eat what they want, sleep where they want. They're on no fence collars in an open landscape. By browsing the scrub and trees that are popping up through the grass, but not all of them, the cattle are engineering the kind of dynamic, semi-open wood pasture ecosystem that once blanketed most of Britain, and certainly all of this place here in Selwood. And before even humans were here, there were cattle. There were wild native cattle, the aurochs, and even earlier than that, the European bison. Another essential keystone process that we've restored to this landscape is the rootling of pigs. There are a smattering of wild boar through the southwest, and we get occasional visits here at Cannwood. That's a species that has been extinct for a number of centuries, which has now made a dramatic recovery in Britain. But we also have Tamworth pigs, which are out all year round, and by turning over the soil through their rootling, they create bare areas on which seeds can germinate. There's a whole range of species, from the ephemeral wildflowers that we so love in this country, the poppies, the scarlet pimpernel, through trees such as black poplar, aspen, willow, that require bare earth in which to germinate. Pigs create tremendous dynamism in the system by breaking apart the ground. Perhaps the most important keystone process to have returned to Cannwood is that carried out by beavers, a species which has been extinct in Britain for at least 500 years and which is now staging a remarkable comeback. By felling the smaller trees along the watercourse to build their dams, beavers create ribbon wetlands which look like strings of Japanese rice terraces along the bottom of the valley. And to some they might look messy, but to wildlife it's a magnet. And the beaver wetlands at Cannwood are simply thrumming with life. I think beavers are psychologically the most important species to have returned to England as well, because they force us to step back and give another species autonomy over sections of the landscape. We're not used to that in Britain. We're used to controlling everything. And we sort of imagine that nature is chaos and we bring order. What beavers show us is that nature knows exactly what it's doing, and often we're the ones to be introducing the chaos. Because by holding all this water back in the landscape, beavers are helping to regulate both flooding in the winter and drought in the summer, and they do it while breathing life back into our landscapes. We don't have wolves back in Britain. Every single European mainland country has wolves back, and so would we if it wasn't for the English Channel. But I don't think it's fanciful to think that at some point wolves will be reintroduced here, if only to get on top of deer numbers which are out of control. None of the magic that's unfolding around us here in this landscape would be possible without the culling of deer. We don't have wolves, but we do have a stalker who knows exactly what he's doing, and the meat, which is delicious, lean, and completely sustainable, goes to my wife's restaurant in London. Because of shifting economic incentives, a growing number of neighbours are starting to look towards a nature-centric approach in the management of their land. If you go to a high point in this part of Somerset, say Alfred's Tower, which overlooks Cannwood, you can see a growing patchwork quilt of wilder approaches, an expanding ink blot of wildness in the heart of the historic Selwood Forest. Some of the species here need a little extra helping hand, so we've put up nesting boxes for dormice, bats, certain birds, and also wild bees. Matt Somerville from Bee Kind Hives pointed out that wild bees are very specific in their requirements. They need a space of 60 to 80 litres with more than one hole, well insulated, facing southwest. And so when he arrived with 4 boxes, he placed me a bet that they would all be occupied within 24 hours, and they were, and have been ever since. We're actively looking to reintroduce some species which have completely disappeared from this landscape. We're working with Operation Turtle Dove on a captive breeding program for these amazing migratory doves. And for the first time in maybe 70 or 80 years, you can hear the magical summer purring of turtle doves across the landscape. Along with 2 other neighbours, we've built 3 stork enclosures, and we'll be breeding white storks for release into the landscape. So my dream is that there'll be white storks nesting in the giant oaks of Selwood for the first time in centuries in the very near future. One species missing from this landscape which particularly fascinates me is the European wildcat. European wildcats clung on in Scotland, but they've been extinct in England and Wales for at least 150 years after centuries of persecution. We're one of a number of landowners captive breeding wildcats for reintroduction projects here in England. There's a string of landscapes from Bodmin to Dartmoor to Exmoor to the Somerset Levels to here in Selwood, up to the great Mesolithic grassland around Stonehenge, down to the New Forest, where it makes perfect sense to put nature recovery first. These are not agriculturally productive landscapes. This is how we restore nature in Britain, by creating these expanding ink blots of wildness that are connected up by corridors of habitat. Immersing myself in the reawakening of nature here at Cannwood during the darkest time of my life has been the thing that's restored hope and meaning and in time even joy. In fact, it's been the most joyful thing perhaps that I've ever done. The whole project is a love letter to my iris, really.